The moment everything changed wasn't dramatic. It didn't happen with raised voices or slammed doors. It happened on a Tuesday afternoon in October when my daughter-in-law sat across from me at my own kitchen table, folded her hands like she was about to chair a board meeting, and said, "We've been thinking, and we really feel it would be best if you let us handle things from here." Handle things. I was 63 years old. I had run a household, raised 2 children, managed the finances for our family business for over 2 decades, and nursed my husband Leonard through 18 months of cancer before holding his hand when he took his last breath. And Cassandra, my son's wife of 4 years, was sitting in my kitchen telling me she wanted to handle things. I remember I put down my coffee cup very carefully, because I didn't trust what I might do with it. That conversation didn't come out of nowhere. Looking back now, I can see the groundwork had been laid for months, maybe longer. But grief does something to your perception. It softens the edges of things you don't want to see clearly. After Leonard died, I was exhausted in a way I hadn't known was possible. Not just sad, but hollowed out, like someone had removed something structural from inside me, and I was still standing through sheer habit. My son, Owen, he was always the responsible one, always the planner, started calling more often, stopped by on weekends, brought Cassandra. I was grateful. I told him so. I told him what a good son he was. I didn't realize I was being evaluated. Leonard and I had built our life carefully. He was an electrical contractor. I was the one who kept the books, filed the taxes, negotiated with suppliers. We weren't wealthy in the way people mean when they say wealthy, but we had done well. Our house on Clover Ridge Road was paid off. We had investments, retirement accounts, savings. Leonard had life insurance. He had a will, a careful, specific will that he and I had worked on together with our attorney the year before his diagnosis, because Leonard was the kind of man who believed in being prepared. Everything came to me. The house, the accounts, all of it, with the provision that, upon my death, the estate would be divided equally between our son and our daughter, Joanna, who lives in Portland and was, for reasons I'll explain, not part of what happened next. I didn't broadcast the details of the will, but Owen knew roughly what was there, and at some point, Cassandra had done the math. The Tuesday conversation started with concern. It always starts with concern. "Mom, we just worry about you being here alone. This house is a lot to manage." She had this way of talking with her eyebrows. They would lift slightly, arranging her face into something that looked like compassion, but felt like something else entirely. Owen and I were talking, and we thought maybe a financial advisor could help you organize things. Someone you trust, to take some of the burden off. "I have a financial advisor," I said. "I've had the same one for 11 years. "Right, but someone more current. Someone who really understands your situation now. My situation now." As if Leonard dying had somehow also killed my ability to read a balance sheet. I said I would think about it. I didn't think about it. I didn't think about it. I called my daughter that night instead. Joanna is younger than Owen by 3 years. She's a landscape architect, married to a woman named Petra, and they have a good life out in Oregon. Joanna and I have always been close in the way that people who are alike are close. Quietly, practically, without a lot of performance. When I told her about the conversation, she was quiet for a moment. "Mom," she said finally, "how often is Owen coming over now?" "A few times a week. And Cassandra?" "Usually with him." Another pause. "Are they talking about moving in?" I laughed. It seemed absurd. Of course not. But I started paying attention differently after that call. And what I noticed, once I was paying attention, was not reassuring. Owen had started referring to the house in the plural. Not your house, but the house. He'd say things like, "We should probably get the gutters looked at," or "We might want to think about updating that bathroom." Small things. The kind of thing you could brush off individually, but that accumulated into a pattern if you were watching for one. Cassandra had started making suggestions about my schedule. Had I thought about downsizing? There were lovely retirement communities. She'd looked into a few. Very active, very social. You'd have people your own age around, Mom. You wouldn't be so isolated. I want to be clear. I was not isolated. I had friends. I had my book club, my volunteer work at the hospital gift shop, my neighbor Ruth Ann, who had been my friend for 22 years. I was not a woman withering alone in a too large house. But Cassandra had decided on a narrative, and she was committed to it. The ask came at Thanksgiving. We had dinner at my house. Owen and Cassandra, Joanna and Petra, who had flown in from Portland. It was, on the surface, a perfectly pleasant meal. I had made Leonard's mother's sweet potato recipe. Petra brought wine. We talked about normal things, and I let myself believe for a few hours that I had been imagining the undercurrent. After dinner, while Joanna and Petra were washing dishes, Owen and Cassandra sat with me in the living room. Cassandra had a folder, an actual folder with printed documents inside it. "We've been doing some research," she said, "and we think the best thing for everyone would be for you to establish a family trust, with Owen as the primary trustee." I looked at my son. He was looking at the coffee table. "A trust would protect your assets," Cassandra continued, "and it would make things so much easier administratively. You wouldn't have to worry about any of it." "I don't worry about any of it now," I said. "I manage it." "Mom." Owen finally looked up. "It's just practical. I'd like to see those documents," I said. She hesitated. Barely, but I saw it and then handed me the folder. I took my time reading. The language was dense, but I have spent decades reading contracts and financial documents. The trust structure she was describing would have transferred primary decision-making authority over my assets to Owen, not jointly. To Owen, I would have an advisory role. An advisory role. An advisory role. In my own estate, I closed the folder. I handed it back to her. "I'll have my attorney look at this," I said. "Thank you for putting it together." The temperature in the room dropped about 15 degrees. That was November. By January, the calls had gotten more frequent and more pointed. Owen started asking me about specific account balances, which I had never discussed with him in detail. I asked him once, carefully, where he'd gotten certain numbers he referenced, and he stumbled over his answer in a way that told me he'd been talking to someone, probably going through Leonard's old files on the one occasion I'd let them stay in the house while I was visiting Joanna. I called my attorney, a woman named Patricia Oakes, who I had worked with for years. I told her everything. She listened carefully and then said, "Eleanor, I want you to do something for me. I want you to change your passwords. All of them. And I want you to come in and let's talk about updating a few things." I spent 2 weeks quietly doing exactly that. And then I waited. The confrontation, when it finally came, was at Easter. I had hosted Easter for years. It was my holiday. Leonard and I had started the tradition when Owen was small, and I had kept it up. I invited Owen and Cassandra. I invited Joanna and Petra. I made the same menu I always made: glazed ham, scalloped potatoes, my mother's deviled egg recipe that nobody has ever successfully duplicated. Everything was fine until the meal was over. We were still at the table, lingering over dessert, when Cassandra said, "We wanted to talk to you about something, Mom. We found a community we think you'd really love, in Scottsdale." I put down my fork. "The units there are beautiful, and they have a really robust activities program." "I'm not moving to Scottsdale," I said. "Mom, just hear us out." "I don't need to hear this out, Cassandra. I've heard this before. In different forms and different conversations, I have heard this for months. I'm not moving. This is my home, and I am not interested in transferring management of my finances to anyone. I'm 63, not 93. I am capable." She looked at Owen. He looked at me. And then he said something I have turned over in my mind many, many times since. "Mom, you being selfish." Joanna went very still across the table. Petra put her hand on Joanna's arm. "I'm sorry," I said. "We're trying to plan, to think about the future, and you're making it impossible because you won't even have the conversation. This house," I said slowly, "belongs to me. My financial accounts belong to me. The decisions about my life belong to me. There is nothing selfish about that. Leonard would have wanted us to look after you. Do not." I heard my own voice change. "Do not tell me what Leonard would have wanted. You knew him for 6 years. I was married to him for 34. And then Cassandra stood up. "I'm not sure, to this day, whether what happened next was intentional or whether she simply moved too quickly and misjudged. I have tried to be fair about this in my own mind. What I know is that she pushed back from the table, her hand caught her wine glass, and the glass went over, directly toward me. Red wine, nearly a full glass, hit my face and my blouse and my hair. The glass itself caught me on the cheekbone, not hard enough to cut, but hard enough that I felt it and knew I would feel it later. There was a moment of absolute silence. Joanna was on her feet. Petra was already reaching for her phone. I sat there, wine dripping from my chin, looking at my son, waiting to see what he would do. He looked at Cassandra. Not at me, at Cassandra. It was an accident, he said. I got up from the table. I walked to the kitchen. I got a dish towel, and I wiped my face. My hands were very steady, which surprised me. I went upstairs, changed my blouse. I could hear Joanna's voice downstairs, low and tight, and then Owen's, rising. I came back down. I picked up my phone from the counter, and in front of all of them, I called Patricia Oakes's emergency line and left a message saying I needed to speak with her first thing Monday morning. Then I looked at Owen and said, I need you both to leave my house now. Cassandra started to say something. Owen put his hand on her arm. They left. Joanna came and stood next to me. She didn't say anything for a moment. Then she said, Mom, are you okay? I will be, I said, and I meant it. The next morning, Joanna drove me to the urgent care clinic because the side of my face had swelled overnight. Not seriously, but enough. The doctor documented it. A contusion from impact with a glass object. Joanna made sure they noted how it happened. I know what you might be thinking. I thought it too. Was it really an accident? Does it matter? What I know is this, an accident or not, my son's first move was to protect his wife. And that told me everything I needed to know about where I stood. Patricia and I met Monday morning. I brought the documentation I'd been quietly gathering for months, a log I had kept, dates and times and notes on every conversation that had felt off. I told her about the Thanksgiving folder, about the questions Owen had asked about specific account numbers, about the suggestion of Scottsdale. I told her about Easter. She listened, made notes, and when I was finished, she said, You've done the right things. Let's talk about what comes next. What came next was a series of steps I will not detail entirely because some of it is still private. But the short version is this. I had already updated my will the previous January, quietly, with only Patricia present, revising certain provisions. I reviewed my beneficiary designations on all accounts. I added security measures that would require specific verification before any changes could be made. I documented the Easter incident formally and kept it on file. And I called Owen. Not to fight. I was done fighting. I called him because he was still my son and I wanted to give him one clear, direct statement of where things stood before the lines were drawn for good. I love you, I said. That hasn't changed and it won't change. But I need you to understand something. This house, these accounts, my life, I am the one who makes decisions about them. Not you, not Cassandra, me. If that's something you can accept, I'd like to have a relationship with you. If it isn't, then I think we need some time apart. He was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, Cassandra just cares about you. That's not what I saw at my Easter table, I said. But that's a conversation for another time. He didn't have a good answer. I didn't expect one yet. The following months were not easy. Owen and I went back and forth in the way families do when something real has ruptured, civil on the surface, stilted underneath. Cassandra and I did not communicate directly. Joanna called me every week, and she came out for a visit in July that felt like coming up for air. What surprised me was how much lighter I felt. I had been so focused on managing the situation quietly, on documenting and preparing, that I hadn't quite realized how much energy I had been spending just holding it all in place. Once it was out in the open, once I had named it and drawn the lines, there was a relief underneath the difficulty that I hadn't expected. I had my book club. I had Ruth Ann. I had my hospital volunteer work. I had my house, which I walked through some mornings just to feel grateful for it. The light in the kitchen, the garden Leonard had planted along the back fence that I had kept up. the guest room where Joanna stayed when she visited. I started doing things I had put off. I hired a financial advisor for a second opinion, not because I doubted myself, but because I wanted independent confirmation that my approach was sound. It was. I took a trip to see a college friend in Vermont that I had been postponing for 2 years. I signed up for a watercolor class at the community center, which I had been curious about for a long time and had somehow never gotten around to. I am not telling this story because I think I was perfect in it. I made mistakes. I was slow to see what was happening. I gave chances I probably should not have given, and I delayed having the direct conversation with Owen for longer than I should have, hoping the situation would resolve itself. It doesn't work that way. The things we don't address do not disappear. They just get larger. But I also know this. I did not let someone take my life from me. Not my house. Not my finances. Not my sense of myself. Something I've learned, living past 60, is that people underestimate you with the best of intentions. They mean well, sometimes, and what they mean is, you need help. You can't handle this. Let us take care of it, and sometimes that care is genuine, and sometimes it is not. The work is learning to tell the difference and having the nerve to act on what you know. Leonard used to say that the most important investments weren't financial ones. The most important investments were the ones you made in yourself, in your own judgment, your own clarity. He was right about a lot of things. I miss him every day. But I am not a woman waiting to be taken care of. I am the woman who kept his books, raised his children, tended his garden, and held his hand at the end. And I am fully capable of handling what comes next. The last thing Owen said to me before we started, slowly and carefully, finding our way back towards something better, he said he was sorry. Not one of those all-purpose apologies that mean nothing, a specific one. He said he was sorry for saying I was selfish. He said he hadn't understood until later what that must have felt like. That was enough to start with. I don't know what happens with Cassandra. That's a longer road. But I know I'm still in my house on Clover Ridge Road. The garden is coming back beautifully this spring. Joanna is visiting in June. I finished my first watercolor last week, a painting of the view from my back porch. And it wasn't very good, but it was mine, and I hung it in the hallway where I can see it every morning. That's the thing about your life. It is yours. And no one, not even the people you love, gets to take it from you without your permission. I learned that lesson later than I should have. But I learned it, and I'm still here. I've had a lot of time to think about what happened. Not just the Easter dinner, not just the wine glass, but all of it. The months of quiet pressure before it. The folder on my coffee table at Thanksgiving. The way Owen said we when he meant Cassandra wants. What I keep coming back to is this. The way people treat you is rarely accidental. It's almost always a reflection of what they believe you'll accept. When Owen started talking about my house like it was a shared decision, it wasn't because he stopped loving me. I think he did love me. He just stopped seeing me clearly. And when someone stops seeing you clearly, when they replace the real you with a softer, more manageable version they've invented in their heads, you have two choices. You can shrink into that version, or you can refuse it. I refused it late. I wish I hadn't waited as long as I did, but I think the delay was its own kind of lesson, because the waiting taught me exactly how much I was willing to quietly absorb before I drew a line. And once I knew that, once I understood my own limit, I never blurted again. There's something about grief that makes you vulnerable in ways you don't fully recognize while you're in it. After Leonard died, I was so grateful for Owen's attention that I overlooked what the attention was actually doing. Gratitude can work against you that way. It softens your edges at exactly the moment when you need them sharpest. I'm not bitter about that. I understand it now. But I tell you this because I think a lot of people listening have been there, have let gratitude or love or the fear of conflict keep them from naming something that needed to be named a long time ago. What I learned from Cassandra, and this is the part that took me a while to admit, is that intelligence without honesty becomes manipulation. She was smart. She researched trust structures. She knew the right language. She framed everything in the vocabulary of care. But underneath all of it was a calculation, and calculation is not the same thing as love. Real care doesn't come with a folder of legal documents. Real care asks what you need and then listens to your answer. What I learned from Owen is that good people can go along with wrong things for a long time before they understand what they've been part of. He came around. Not all at once. Not perfectly. But he did. I believe that's because somewhere in him the values I had tried to give him were still there, waiting. The reckoning came eventually. That's what tends to happen when people build their behavior on something that isn't true. The weight of it gets too heavy to carry. And what I learned for myself, the hardest lesson and maybe the most useful, is that clarity is something you have to choose. It doesn't just arrive. I had to decide to pay attention, to keep records, to make the calls, to sit across from my son and say what was true even when my voice wanted to soften it. That took practice. It took courage I had to locate consciously, like finding something in a drawer you knew was there but couldn't quite put your hand on. I'm still in my house on Clover Ridge Road. The garden is blooming. Joanna is coming in June. My watercolor is hanging in the hallway, and it's not very good. But every time I walk past it, I think, I made that. It's mine. That's enough. More than enough. It's everything.